galaxy will remember this day. Not as a victory, but as a warning. You've doomed us all!
You awaken, not in light, but in the clamor of steel. The sound of hammers ringing across the bones of a forgotten world. It is not the voice of gods that calls you, but iron itself, hot, alive, singing through the veins of Mandalore before it bore that name. The sand here is red, not with rust, but memory, and you kneel before it, knowing without knowing that this dust was once soaked with purpose. The sky above is not gentle. It is a dome of fire and ash, scorched by twin moons that have watched every betrayal, every vow, every helm passed from one broken soul to another. You do not remember arriving, but the weight of the place settles on your shoulders like ancestral armor. It is the first age, before Sundari rose from stone, before Vizsla struck down the stars. Here, there is only Himptha, first Mandalore. Not by name, but by fire. You walk barefoot through the embers of battlefields so old even the rocks weep. A voice stirs within you, not yours, not his, but all. It whispers in tongues long silenced. We did not conquer for blood. We conquered to become. And so you see him. He is not cloaked in grandeur. No myth has yet gathered to shield him. He is raw, towering, flesh hardened by 100 deaths. His helm is primitive, angular, like the bones of ancient beasts. He is shaping something at the edge of a cliff, forging not metal but legacy. And you feel it not with sight but soul, that this helm, this jagged, sacred mask, will one day bind empires and tear them apart. He is not alone. Around him are those who came not for glory, but for survival. Exiles, warriors, starved prophets. Each one carries loss in their gaze, like a blade they cannot sheathe. And yet, in this moment, there is a stillness, a solemnity that runs deeper than war. They kneel not to a man, but to the idea that rose in his silence, that honor is not given, but fought for and remembered. You drift closer, and the air thickens with memory. The first Mandalore speaks, though not aloud. You hear him through fire, through the cracking of bone, through the shiver in your chest. He speaks of a world burned by outsiders, a home taken from them light years ago. He does not dream of vengeance. He dreams of never kneeling again. Their first march is not toward conquest, but reclamation. They do not take, they challenge. One planet, then 2, then 12. The stars blink nervously as the creed begins to take form, not written in text, but etched in the scars of the fallen. You see the shaping of the armor now, each plate earned, not inherited. Their armor is mismatched, sacred in its irregularity. One pauldron from a fallen brother, one gauntlet from a defeated foe. Every piece a history, every dent a prayer. They are not yet called Mandalorians. That name is still soft clay, but already they wear it in the way they rise, unyielding. The first Mandalore, who came from nothing, gives them everything but his name. He says, "You are what cannot be undone." And they become warborn. Time becomes a river without banks. You are no longer walking, you are remembering. Campaigns waged not just against beings, but against forgetting. The first Mandalore leads not for empire, but for remembrance. Every city they raise is a hymn. Every stronghold they leave behind is a verse you begin to understand. They do not fight to win, they fight to be known, not by others, but by themselves. As if to say, I bled, therefore I am. You witness the ritual of the first death watch, not the faction of schism yet, but a solemn ceremony. A warrior falls, and in his passing, others take a sliver of his beskar and melt it into their own. One death, many shields. One wound, infinite strength. In the shadows beyond, the galaxy shudders. Jedi whisper of them in fear. Republics call them savages, but they are not understood. They are not meant to be. They are the story the stars try to forget but fail, because the first Mandalore carved that story, not into stone, but into motion, into wind, into silence. You see his face only once when he removes his helm in solitude, and in that moment you understand he is not a god. He is afraid, he is tired, but he knows that the myth must be stronger than the man. And so the helm returns, the silence resumes, and the legend walks forward, wearing iron-like memory. The planet itself begins to change. The red earth becomes sacred. The bones of the fallen are not buried, but integrated. Temples built from the rib cages of mythic beasts. Shrines where children are taught to listen, not speak. The air is heavy with becoming. You descend into the first crevices of Mandalore, the planet, not the empire. Deep, trembling veins of ore that sing when struck. Here, the first forge is lit, not to create weapons, but to awaken them. Every blade born here remembers. Every flame recites names, and you are shown softly, mournfully, how the first Mandalore died, not on the battlefield, but beneath the stars, alone, looking skyward, as if seeking a home never found. His final breath is not a cry, but a silence, so full it deafens. His helm placed atop a pyre, not to burn, but to be cooled forever in ice and oath. But he does not vanish. He becomes wind. He becomes creed. He becomes the sound of a blaster misfiring when honor is forgotten. And every time a Mandalorian dons their helm, they look through his gaze. Even if they don't know it, you kneel now not to worship, but to remember. The dust clings to your knees. The sky opens above like an ancient wound, and somewhere in your bones you carry his name. Though it is never spoken, you rise. The stars do not applaud, but they remember. So do you. You descend again, not into the soil, but into memory, thick with iron and grief. The wars have grown now grander, crueler, and with them, so too has the myth of the first Mandalore. His silence has become scripture. His armor, once a personal burden, now echoes through the forges of countless sons and daughters who never knew his voice, but carry his war cry in their marrow. You feel the world shift beneath your feet, Mandalore itself, groaning like an old beast made of metal and scar tissue. Cities have risen from the dust, not with peace, but with sharpened pride. Sindari, the jewel of conquest, breathes beneath a dome of glass, and steal a flower of order blooming from ancient ashes. You walk its halls now, bare of weapon, but heavy with unseen history. The walls remember. They whisper of the old crusades, of clans that rose like firestorms and fell like shattered banners. You pass a corridor veined with light, where warriors once marched, helmets sealed, hearts hollow, bound by creeds that have begun to fracture. This is the time of blood vow and broken shields, the time when clans begin to taste the poison of power and forget the hunger of their forebears. Still, you walk, and the names rise from the stone like old smoke. Ordo cries, Rook, Ren, each name a blade, each line a chasm. cut into the skin of the galaxy. You pause before a mural, the Siege of Galadrin. You know it without knowing. Mandalorians struck down by Jedi, betrayed not by weakness, but by perception. The galaxy called them warmongers, and so they became what the galaxy feared. You feel it again, the ache of being misnamed. The children are trained younger now. You see them in the depth of memory, lifting rifles before they learn their true names. And in their eyes, you catch something both tragic and holy, the need to be worthy of a myth they will never understand. They are not born into peace, but into expectation. An expectation, like armor, weighs heavier when passed down without choice. You wander further into the mountain citadel of Kalevala, where diplomacy once tried to tame the old fires. It failed. It always fails. For Mandalore is not a world that bows easily to unity. It is a world of clans, of sacred division. You feel the great civil war unfold around you, a storm of blood and oath. Brothers turning against brothers, not for power, but for purity. Some say the true Mandalorians fought for honor, others for control. But here, in this soft place between memory and myth, you understand they fought to preserve a story that no longer recognized them, and always hovering just beyond reaches the Darksaber. A blade forged in a temple not of Mandalore, but of the Jedi. Its origin is paradox. It is both salvation and curse. You see it passed from hand to hand, like a whisper of destiny. When held by the worthy, it glows with clarity. When held by the power-hungry, it flickers with warning. But the saber does not choose. It merely reflects. Like a mirror made of void and fire. You remember Tari Vizsla, the first to hold both, the saber and the creed, Jedi and Mandalorian, a bridge never truly accepted by either path. He tried to stitch the wound closed, but the wound was deeper than any saber could heal. And so the Darksaber passed into legend, stolen from the Jedi Temple and reclaimed by blood. Every ruler since has sought it. Every clan has killed for it. But few have understood that to wield it is not to rule it, is to be haunted. In the ash of Concord dawn, you taste the ruin of Jango's silence. He too was made legend, and, like all legends, he was betrayed, sold to the galaxy as a template, his soul harvested to create a million faces without identity. The clones carried his blood, but not his name. And somewhere in you, a quiet sadness stirs for warriors made tools for legacy mass-produced and forgotten. Yet even they, in battle, echo something old. You hear it in the rhythm of their march, the heartbeat of Mandalore, scattered across 1,000 systems. Now the night of 1,000 tears rises before you like a storm that never passed. The Great Purge, the fall of Sundari, the Empire's shadow sweeping across domes and deserts alike. You stand in the ruins, bones powdered beneath your steps. And the silence here is not peaceful, it is hollow. The Darksaber vanished, the creed shattered into whispers, the people scattered like stars torn from constellation. And yet, even now, even in the stillness of exile, the Mandalorians endure, not as empire, not as army, but as memory. In sewers, on moons, in hiding, they recite the creed in hushed voices. They train in shadow. They forge in secret. Their armor is worn, but their eyes still shine with the ember of becoming. For Mandalore is not dead. It is never dead. It only sleeps. and in every sleeping child, in every hidden forge, in every whispered vow, it waits. You stand now at the crossroads of history and myth. You have walked with rulers who were never crowned, with warriors who never wept, with children who wore helmets heavier than their hearts. And you realize something profound: not all who wore the helm understood it, not all who led deserved it, but all who dared to claim it became part of the song. A song not sung by bards, but by blood, by dust, by silence. You reach for the saber not to claim it, but to understand. And in that moment, you feel every life it has passed through, every hand that trembled, every soul that burned brighter before fading into shadow. The blade hums in your palm, not with power, but with memory. And when you let it go, it does not fall. It vanishes into mist. For now you know what they knew, that is not a place, not a sword, not a creed. It is a becoming, and it begins again. You drift now in the quiet aftermath, where the stars hang still and unblinking above a people broken but unyielding. There is no battlefield beneath your feet this time, only space, sendless and echoing, and you float through it, not as a warrior, but as a witness. The tale of Mandalore continues, not in war cries, but in exiles, in those who survived the silence after the bombs fell, after the domes cracked, after the legacy was shattered. Into myth and longing, you hear nothing, and in that nothing, the truth hums. Mandalore is never gone. It only sleeps beneath the ash, waiting for the footsteps of the next soul brave enough to believe. From the ruins of Sindari to the icy moons of Concordia, scattered clans whisper to one another like old spirits. Some still wear the armor, pitted and scorched, carrying rust and memory in equal measure. Others hide it away, ashamed of the weight, the cost. The creed itself has splintered. Some claim the way must be followed without question. Ever remove the helm, never show your face, never let the galaxy touch your skin. Others speak of evolution, of removing the armor not to betray, but to heal. And you, caught in this web of myth and marrow, walk the liminal path between them. You travel to the dust-veiled caves of Glavis, where a forge still breathes in secret. There, a lone armorer speaks to you without words, her hammer ringing with prophecy. She tells you of the mythosaur as a beast, but as a metaphor, a creature so vast, so ancient, that to tame it is to tame the self. She speaks of fire, not as weapon, but as purification. And in that glow, you understand what the old ways could never say aloud, that the helm is not the creed. The creed is the fire that shapes the soul within. Elsewhere, others walk roads far from these truths. On Navarro, on Kalevala, on ships lost in the void, Mandalorians gather in fractured bands, hunters, rebels, mercenaries, orphans. Some crave the dark saber again, others reject it as cursed. And in their chaos, the blade re-emerges, passed now into hands, not forged in old bloodlines, but in new choices. You see Hertha, wielder not of prophecy, but of pain, her lineage tied not to ancient wars, but to bridges burned and rebuilt. And beside her, him the one who walks in silence, who was never meant to lead, but whose hands have healed more than they've harmed, a foundling, a father, a man made myth by accident, not ambition. You walk beside them, unseen, feeling the tremble of unity, where once there was only vengeance. Together, they do not just reclaim Mandalore, they step foot on the scorched surface, not as conquerors, but as mourners. The capital is gone, the soil poisoned, but beneath it all, you sense it the pulse, slow, deep, waiting. They find the living waters beneath the mines, not for power, but for remembrance. And when the mythosaur stirs, its shadow brushing their dreams, you feel the moment Mandalore itself breathes again. But not all is healed. Others rise in the void, pretenders cloaked in armor, their hearts hollow, speaking of empire in the name of legacy. They twist the creed into chains. They wear the helm but do not carry its weight. And the people must choose, follow the myth or awaken it, rebuild the past or reimagine it. The Darksaber is broken now, shattered in battle, yet no one mourns it, not truly, for they have learned at last that the symbol is not the strength, the people are, and so they return, in threes, in dozens, in silence. From rimworlds and ruins, they come to stand on the dead soil, planting nothing but hope. A city will rise again, not like Sundari, crowned in glass and arrogance, but slow, humble, breathing the old dust. Children run without fear, forges burn, with quiet songs, and the stars, long indifferent, now watch with something like wonder. You stand at the edge of it all, the end of the myth and the beginning of the memory. You watch as a young warrior kneels beside a grave, helmet in hand, tears carving paths down his soot-covered face. He whispers a name you do not know, and in that whisper 1,000 years bloom. Because Mandalore is not a throne, not a blade, not a law. Mandalore is the unbroken line of those who remember. It is the rhythm of metal, striking metal, the vow made in silence, the face behind the helm, the child carried through war, the mythos beneath the surface, the father who protects, the mother who forges, the exile who returns, and you, standing here at the close of the dream, understand, at last, this was never about war. It was about becoming. So you bow your head, not to mourn, but to listen. The stars begin to hum. The earth sighs beneath your feet, and in your chest, something begins to burn. You do not speak. You do not need to. You are Mandalorian, now, not by blood, but by choice. You open your eyes to the cold shimmer of starlight, filtered through a broken visor. There is no ground beneath. You, only the hollow ache of space, stretching like a wound across time. Around you, ghost ships drift silent, armored, ancient. Their hulls are painted in sigils, no longer spoken, their cannons aimed at nothing, their engines dead. These are the remnants of the hidden crusade, the lost vow of Mandalore that fled the core not in retreat, but in pursuit of something holier than conquest, the right to vanish in dignity. You move among them now, your breath shallow, your memory dim, yet something in your bones recognizes this exile. These were the warriors who chose disappearance over corruption, silence over spectacle. They did not abandon Mandalore, they preserved it. You are drawn to one vessel in particular, its prow shaped like a mythosaur's skull, its engines entombed in obsidian soot. Inside, the air is thick with the weight of unspoken oaths. You feel them clinging to the walls, etched into the bulkheads in blood and rust. These were not raiders, they were pilgrims. Each room you pass hums with the echoes of prayers spoken not to gods, but to ancestors. You find a war table in the heart of the ship, and it is not empty. There, a single datapad still glows, flickering with the names of 1,000 warriors who vanished from Mandalorian record, their fates unsung, their deaths unclaimed. They called themselves the Gotten Vor, the last flame, formed in the dying light of the Third Mandalorian Civil War. They were neither loyal to house nor creed, only to one sacred purpose: to keep the original way alive in the stars. When Sindari burned and the great houses fractured, they did not bend the knee to the puppet rulers propped by foreign empires. They left. Quietly, entire clans dismantled themselves overnight. And for every warrior who stayed to fight, into the outer rim, disappearing beyond hyperspace lanes, vanishing from the sight of the Republic, the Sith, and even the Jedi. But you see them now. Their journey was not abandonment. It was pilgrimage. You walk through the barracks, and your breath catches. Each bed is made, each weapon still polished. You touch a breastplate engraved with a twin star symbol not found in any archive. It hums beneath your fingers, alive with meaning. These were warriors who believed in a myth before it had a name. They knew the truth, that Mandalore was not a planet, not a throne, not a war to be won. It was a silence to be protected, a promise to endure. They believed that every empire would eventually fall, but the way, if kept pure, would remain in exile, untouched. Their leader was never crowned. She was known only as the Veiled Matron. Her face was never seen, her name never spoken outside the fleet. But she was fire. You see glimpses, now holograms, playing in static silence, of her addressing warriors in hangars. Her voice calm, her words woven with iron. She did not command. She reminded. Every mission launched under her gaze was not for territory, but for memory, to rescue sacred texts, to retrieve orphaned foundlings, to carry away fragments of Mandalorian culture before it could be twisted. She carried no saber, she bore no sigil, yet every warrior knelt when she passed. Outside the derelict ship, more vessels drift, scattered across the dark, linked by encrypted chants only the faithful knew. You follow their trail now, each ship a breadcrumb across forgotten systems, a refueling moon where armors were reforged in shadow, a silent station where children were trained in darkness, learning to speak the old tongue without being heard. The crusade was never about returning in glory. It was about enduring until Mandalore remembered itself. But not all who vanished stayed noble. Some lost their way. You enter a cruiser ringed in black its walls, lined with trophies from unworthy hunts. Here, the crusade splintered. Some captains broke from the matron's vision. They began to sell their blades to the highest bidder. They claimed to preserve the creed, but their armor bore the marks of slavery, not sanctuary. Infighting spread. Vows were broken. In one log, you read of a mutiny that ended in silence. An entire warship vented into the void for betrayal. The matron wept for none of them. You return to her ship. In its shrine room, beneath a cracked dome, you find her helm. It rests upon a folded cloak, untouched by time. The visor is dark. The air around it hums, and beside it, engraved into the stone floor, are 7 words in Old Mandoa: to vanish is not to forget, it is to guard. You kneel, not to worship, but to understand. The veiled matron died, not in battle, but in stillness. Her final transmission was not a command, but a lullaby in the old tongue, sung to no one and everyone. Her body was returned to the stars. No tomb, no name, just stardust and vow. And yet, across the galaxy, whispers persist. Some say her spirit guides lost warriors in the dark, that when a foundling cries alone, a soft voice answers, that when a helm is donned in silence, her fire ignites again. You rise, carrying the weight of her unseen crown, not for power, but for promise. The hidden crusade is no longer hidden. You have seen it. You remember. And in remembering, you become part of it, out here in the dark. Mandalore was never lost. It was only waiting. You move now through echoes, layered not in time, but in longing, where the stars grow distant and yet pulse with something warm and remembered. The fleets of the hidden crusade may have scattered, but the vow they made burns still beneath your ribs, drawing you deeper into the wake of a pilgrimage that never truly ended. As your boots touch the fractured deck of another derelict carrier, you feel the vibration of oaths not broken, only buried, held close, like heat in the hollow of exile. This was the sanctum of the 7 vows, a ship not armed for war, but for remembrance. Here, 7 clans sealed their blades, not in surrender, but in sacred pact, that the way would survive without the need to conquer, that it would live in memory, not monuments. The walls of this place are lined with sigils made from braided fiber and scorched cloth, not metal. You pass beneath banners stitched by hand, weathered by breath, not fire. One is embroidered with a child's name, another with a mythic beast that never existed. These are not trophies. These are talismans. You realize, as you move softly through the hall, that this was not a warship. It was a reliquary. Every chamber a chapel. Every door a gate to a story too precious to forget. There is no command bridge here. Instead, at the heart of the vessel, you find a circle of 7 chairs worn, facing inward, empty. In the center, a flame still flickers, preserved by stasis, burning in defiance of time. The 7 vows were never spoken aloud, but they were lived. You place your hand above the flame, and it does not burn. It breathes. In that breath, you feel their oaths like whispered thunder. We vow to forget conquest and remember creation. We vow to raise orphans, not as soldiers, but as souls. We vow to teach the tongue, not the trigger. We vow to bury no one unnamed. We vow to never let armor speak louder than honor. We vow to kneel only in remembrance, never in defeat. We vow that exile shall not silence us, but sanctify us. The vows enter you not as rules, but as warmth, settling into the silence between your bones. This was the true legacy of the hidden crusade, not battlefields won or enemies slain, but the refusal to become what others expected. They were called cowards by those who remained behind, called heretics by those who twisted the creed into chains. But here, among these halls, heavy with absence, you understand they were not running, they were preserving. In a galaxy that sought to define Mandalore through war, they chose instead to define it through wonder. You journey next to a moon long abandoned, its surface pockmarked with ancient craters and cloaked in lavender fog. There, tucked beneath obsidian ridges, you find the remnants of a monastery carved from the bones of a fallen starship. Inside, children once studied the old ways, not with weapons, but with song. They sang the stories of the first men, not as conquest, but as becoming. Their voices were their armor, their memories, their blades. You find fragments of their chants scratched into the floor. We are not forged for fury. We are shaped by silence. And the helm is not a mask. It is a mirror. You linger in that place, letting the echoes of their learning soften your breath. Then, deeper still, you find the vault of names, a vast chamber where every foundling rescued by the crusade was honored. No records, no bloodlines, only names etched into curved walls, each glowing faintly with their own light. Thousands upon thousands. You trail your fingers across them, names without fame, and yet each one a thread in the vast weave of Mandalorian becoming. No one is forgotten here, not even you. In the center of the vault rests a single helm, painted bone white, unadorned. It was once worn by the veiled matron's chosen successor, warrior who chose to live without recognition, guiding new clans into the stars until even her name was lost to time. But the helm remains untouched. It hums softly in the dark, and when you lift it, you see not your reflection, but stars. Not who you are, but who you could be. You do not take the helm, you bow to it, then rise. Beyond the monastery, you follow. An encrypted signal across forgotten star lanes to a listening station buried in the crust of a dead planet. Here, the last living archivists of the hidden crusade kept watch not for enemies, but for signs. Signs that Mandalore was ready to remember itself. That the world would one day need its dreamers again. You find logs detailing their patience of silence, waiting, watching, listening for voices across the dark who still believed, and they found them. A whisper from Concordia, a spark from Kalevala, a rumor from the outer rim. Small flames, yes, but growing. And then, at last, you see it. The final transmission sent from the Crusade's core. A message not of war, but of return. We do not come to reclaim, we come to remind that we are still here, that we still believe, and that Mandalore is not the steel in your hand, it is the fire in your breath. You stand alone in the station, that message flickering before you like prophecy. You do not weep, you do not speak, you simply feel it, that the 7 vows were not buried in exile. They live in you now, in every choice you make to protect, not destroy, in every silence you keep to honor, not fear, in every helm you wear, not to hide, but to remember. You leave the station with nothing in your hands. No weapons, no trophies, only story. And story is enough, because as you return to the stars, one truth burns brighter than any blade. The hidden crusade was never lost. It was waiting for someone to remember it. And now you have. You drift now between what was and what must be, guided not by maps, but by memory and the subtle gravity of vowborn echoes. The hidden crusade has left no path, only presence. It lingers in the dust that settles in forgotten corridors, in the hum beneath old armor when it is lifted with reverence, in the hush of breath just before the helmet seals. And as you move through this final memory, you do not walk as witness anymore. You walk as keeper. Your footsteps carry not just your weight, but the weight of those who vanished to preserve something larger than glory. Those who sacrificed legacy so that the soul of Mandalore might survive, untouched, unbent. You find yourself on a drifting fragment of Ringworld, cracked in two by ancient orbital fire. Not a garden of crops or war trophies, but of memory. Every flower here sprouts from the soil of mourning. Each stem bends toward a name carved on stone, without flourish. These are the graves of the silent clans, the last remaining souls who took the 7 vows, not just as law, but as breath. No flames burn, only wind moves, gently turning the petals like whispered prayers. You kneel before a stone marked with a sigil you do not recognize, but you feel its meaning, the pain of sacrifice, not written in legend, but in quiet absence. These were the ones who refuse to return, even when summoned. They feared the resurgence of Mandalore would once again invite the rot of ambition. They believed the dream could only live if never touched by empire again. You don't judge them, you understand. Not all legacies must be reclaimed. Some must be allowed to rest. Further inward, you uncover the last forge of the hidden crusade. Unlike those carved in basalt or scorched into mountain stone, this one is formed of silence and resonance. The anvil is glass, fractured but whole. The flames are cold and blue, and when they flare, they whisper, not with heat, but with names. You step toward it, and the forge does not react with fire, it greets you with memory. Around you swirl images, children carried on shoulders through corridors of night. Warriors tending to each other's wounds, with gentleness unseen in war zones. Elders singing in the deep tongue beneath flickering lights. None of this was battle. All of this was Mandalore. You place your hand on the anvil, and the whispers swell. They show you the last gathering of the crusade before they dissolved themselves entirely. 7 clans, 7 leaders, each one standing beneath a black sun as the stars blinked above like distant sentinels. There were no speeches, no banners, only a silent agreement that they would not return to lead. They would not become symbols. Their story would live in rumor, their oaths in exile. And with that, they each removed their helms, buried them in worlds unnamed, and vanished. But not all vanished completely. Some stayed behind, hidden in plain sight. You feel their presence now in ancient marketplaces, disguised as merchants and teachers. One is a star map seller who always warns children not to follow the old routes. Another is a healer on a rain-racked moon who touches her patient's temples with fingers that once pulled triggers. They did not forget the way. They simply refused to let it be distorted again. Their silence is not abandonment, it is guardianship. You journey through a final corridor where light bends strangely, and in its fold you see the matron once more, not as a figure, but as an idea. Her cloak flutters without breeze, her face remains hidden, and yet her gaze pierces through time itself. She says nothing, only tilts her head, as if asking, "What will you do with what you now know?" And you have no answer. Because the truth is not a path, it is a burden. You do not carry it for glory. You carry it because no one else remembers, and that is enough. You return at last to a small, nameless moon, the one where your journey began, though you hadn't known it. Beneath the same scorched sky, beneath the same half-buried stars, you now walk taller, not with pride, but with purpose. In your arms, there is no relic. In your grasp, no saber. In your voice, no command. But behind your eyes, there lives the crusade. You gather the fragments of armor found in your travels, not to wear, but to lay to rest. One piece from each vow-keeper, one symbol from each ship, a shard of the matron's broken sigil. And in the soil, you bury them together, not as grave goods, but as seeds. Around them, you carve no monument, You speak no dedication, only silence. And from that silence, something sacred begins again. A child watches you from the ridge, helmet too large, eyes wide. She says nothing, but you see the question in her glance. You nod once, and she kneels. Not to you, but to the memory you protect. She does not know the vows, but she will. You walk away, your path unmarked. No one will write your name. No ballad will sing of your choices. But in the far corners of the galaxy, where the fires still flicker in hidden forges, where lost clans whisper the old tongue, your journey will ripple, and long after your bones have returned to dust, someone will whisper of the one who remembered, the one who walked with the vanished, the one who returned not with sword or crown, but with vow. And in that whisper, Mandalore lives, not as war, but as a way. You awaken beneath glass, but it is cracked, and the sky beyond it glows orange with smoke and the memory of fire. This is not dawn, it is aftermath. You rise slowly in the ruins of Sundari, the once proud capital of Mandalore, now fallen into dust and silence. The domes that once shimmered with defiant pride are shattered above you, and sunlight bleeds through their wounds like forgotten tears. Around you lie remnants of a city built to touch the stars, but brought low by its own splintered dreams. You walk barefoot across the stone, still warm from the last bombardment, and every step echoes like a question across time. How does an empire die without screaming? Once, Sundari stood as the crown of Mandalore, just a city, but a statement. It rose from the desert floor in perfect symmetry, a dome of steel and artifice, designed to keep nature out and peace in. It was built not by warriors, but by reformers, those who believed the blade could be laid down, that culture could outlive conflict. You feel their hope still lingering in the bones of the city, in the graceful curves of broken towers, in the murals half preserved by ash. They called it pacifism, but beneath every polished surface was tension, clans held together not by belief, but by exhausted tolerance. Sundari was not unity. It was compromised, disguised as peace. You pass through the central promenade, where once music played. Now it lies in rubble, the instruments shattered, the voices silenced. Dust clings to your skin as if trying to remind you of something older. You stop before a statue, still standing, though blackened by flame. It is of a Queen noble, masked, arms raised, not in battle, but in welcome. Duchess Satine cries. You know her name without being told. Her presence still lingers like perfume in stone. She tried to crown Mandalore with peace. She tried to guide it away from blood, toward something softer, something sane. But the galaxy was not ready, and neither were her people. Her rule was a candle lit in a storm. She burned brightly, briefly, and when she fell, she did not fall to enemies alone. She fell to the weight of expectation, to the impossibility of changing a people who had carved their identity from war. You see her death now, not as tragedy, but inevitability, not because she was wrong, but because the dream she carried required not politics, but transformation. And transformation cannot be imposed. It must be chosen. You walk deeper into the city's bones, past council chambers collapsed under their own grandeur. Here the politicians gathered once, draped in fine robes, speaking of neutrality, while shadows gathered at their doorstep. You feel the betrayal coiled in those rooms, the deals made in whispers, the compromises that cost more than blood. And in one chamber, you find a sigil painted hastily across a wall, half smeared but still defiant. Death Watch. The name cuts through the silence like a blade, drawn in prayer. They rose in secret, fueled by resentment, by a longing for a Mandalore that no longer existed. To them, Sundari was not salvation, it was blasphemy. They did not seek to destroy the city. They sought to awaken the soul they believed had been buried beneath it. But in their zeal, they shattered more than stone. They fractured the already fragile heart of a people torn between memory and future. You see now the twin truths. Death Watch did not kill Sundari. Neither did the Empire. Sundari died of forgetting what it meant to be Mandalorian. You emerge into the outer ring, where the markets once flourished. The stalls are charred skeletons, their wares long looted or lost. But one still stands a forge, small and unremarkable, but intact. You step inside, and the air changes. It is warmer here, not with fire, but with feeling. Tools lie untouched. A half-formed gauntlet rests on the workbench, and above it, carved into the wall with quiet reverence, are the words, "Armor is not worn to conquer, it is worn to carry." This was no weaponsmith's forge. This was a sanctuary, a place where armor was forged, not to kill, but to remember. Perhaps one artisan stayed behind, even as the city fell. Perhaps they believed that so long as one helm was shaped in peace, Sundari was not yet lost. You sit there for a moment, letting the silence settle. The city breathes around you, barely beyond the forge. The catacombs open, ancient tunnels once used by resistance cells, by fugitives, by those who refused to pick a side in wars that never ended. You descend into them now, your hands brushing against cold walls that have heard every secret ever whispered beneath Mandalore. Down here, the city is preserved not in stone, but in shadow. You see etchings of children playing, notes scratched into the stone, recipes, vows, names. These are the layers of civilization never written into archives. And at the very heart of this undercity, you find a chamber untouched. A throne room, perhaps, but not like those above. No seat, no banners, only a shallow pool, still and silver, surrounded by 7 broken helms, arranged like stars around a center no longer occupied. Here, leaders came not to be seen, but to be forgotten. Here, they laid down their power when it burned too heavy. You kneel beside the water, and your reflection shimmers, not as you are, but as you were meant to become. Sundari is not just a ruin, it is a mirror. It shows you every attempt to rewrite Mandalorian identity, and every failure to hold it. It shows you Satine's dream, noble but fragile. It shows you Maul's conquest, powerful but hollow. It shows you the Empire's control, efficient but soulless. And it shows you yourself, not a ruler, not a warrior, but a thread in a vast, unfinished weave. You rise at last, the city still broken around you, but the silence no longer feels empty. It feels full, full of memory, of missteps, of meanings still waiting to be reclaimed. The crown forged here was never made of Beskar. It was forged from silence, from the collective breath held by a people afraid to choose between who they were and who they could become. And now, as the wind moves through the shattered dome, you understand Mandalore does not rise from war. It rises from remembering, and Sundari, though fallen, still remembers you. You walk now through the silence after the silence, where even the dust has grown tired of settling. Sundari breathes beneath your feet, not with life, but with remembrance. The bones of the city do not protest your presence. They welcome you like a lost child, returning to a home burned down long before you were born. You feel it in the walls, the echo of lives lived in defiance, in diplomacy, in despair. Sundari is not merely a ruin. It is a memory still unfolding, its pages written in broken glass and soot above you. The dome is no longer whole, yet light spills through in ragged sheets, painting the city in strokes of pale gold and mourning. You follow that light toward the remnants of the royal archive, where knowledge once lived under heavy guard, protected not by weapons, but by words too dangerous to be forgotten. The doors are warped, split open from the inside. You step into the remains of wisdom, the broken vaults where records once pulsed with the heartbeat of Mandalorian identity. Pages charred, holocrons shattered, but in one corner, a solitary terminal blinks, faint but persistent, like a star refusing to go out. You activate it, and the voice that emerges is brittle, halting, feminine, warm. The Duchess, Satine's final address, left behind not for her allies nor her enemies, but for the soul of Mandalore itself. She speaks of peace not as surrender, but as courage, of strength not as dominance, but as discipline. Her words fall like petals in your chest, soft and sharp. She knew what they would do. She knew what would happen, and still she believed. She believed the city could be more than a crown of ash, that her people could choose another path. You feel her voice settle in your breath, and with it something fragile and glowing. Not hope, not yet, but its ghost. You leave the archive and follow the veins of the city deeper, where the great ventilation tunnels once hummed with artificial air. Now they are hollow cathedrals, echoing with wind and memory. Here you find the graffiti of the fallen messages, scrawled in panic, defiance, and love. We are still Mandalorian. This is not the end. She believed in us. You trace each message with your fingers, letting them burn into you like forgotten scripture. No temple ever held more sacred text. A sudden breeze carries you into the former barracks, where soldiers once trained, not for conquest, but for restraint. You find combat helmets stacked beside meditation mats, rifles paired with books of philosophy. There was once a generation that believed it was possible to fight without becoming the fight. They wore their armor like mirrors, not threats. In the silence, you hear their drills, the synchronized footsteps, the breath before a strike, the pause after a decision. This, too, was the Mandalore that Sundari tried to birth, a people whose power lay not in destruction, but in self-control. And then you hear it, a faint hum, pulsing beneath the rubble. You follow it to the old fusion core beneath the city, where the energy grid was once maintained. What you find is astonishing. A beacon, long dormant, now pulsing back to life. Not a signal for help, not a call for vengeance, a call for memory. It transmits only one phrase on a loop in the old tongue. We were, we are, we could be again. You understand then that someone, perhaps many, refused to let Sundari's death be final. That even amid the collapse, there were those who planted seeds in the ashes, believing that one day someone would return to water them with remembrance. You step out again into the open air, where the wind has changed direction. It now carries not just dust, but voice faint, distant, rising. And as you climb to the upper terraces, you see them, not many, but enough, survivors, descendants, pilgrims. They walk through the ruins, not looting, not mourning, but cleaning, clearing away what does not belong, lifting stones with reverence, speaking softly to the walls, as if waking something ancient and sleeping. One child runs his fingers along the edge of a broken pillar and whispers a name you do not know, and you realize this is how a city breathes again, with fanfare, but with fidelity. At dusk, you join them around the remains of a shattered fountain where water once sang through the city's heart. They've lit no fire, they speak no oath, yet the moment holds a sacred stillness. You hear the creak of armor, the shuffling of tired feet, the quiet rasp of cloth being tied around a wound. No one leads, no one commands. This is not a ritual. It is instinct, and it is more powerful than any ceremony ever imposed from a throne. And as the sun finally slips beneath the jagged horizon, casting the city in hues of rust and ember, you know this is the beginning, not of a return to old glories, but of something braver, of healing, of remembering without repeating, of building something new, using the bones of what fell not as shackles, but as scaffolding. You walk back to the edge of the city and turn once more to face it. Sundari, the fallen crown, the broken dream, the wounded soul of Mandalore. It does not ask for forgiveness. It does not beg for resurrection. It simply waits to be understood. And in that patience lies its strength. You bow your head, not in submission, but in solidarity. For you are part of its story, not the glory, not the fall, but the in-between. You leave no marker behind, no name, no title, only footprints, already half buried by the wind. But Sundari knows you were here, and in its silence, it thanks you. You return to Sundari not by choice, but by something in your chest, drawing you back through the dust, through the corridors of half-ruined memory, to stand once more where so many voices fell quiet. This time the city is different, not mended, not risen, but still, as if it knows you've come not to walk its ruins, but to listen to what they're becoming. The wind moves softly now, brushing over stone and shard, as if blessing every scar. The sky is bruised with the pale light of coming dawn, and for the first time, Sundari does not weep, it waits. You make your way to the central dome, its great ribs cracked like an old cathedral's bones, but its spine intact. Beneath it, the heartbeat of the city remains a single column of light descending from the broken ceiling onto the floor below, where fragments of old banners still rest. You sit at the edge of the light, palms flat against the cold stone, and let the silence speak. It tells you stories no archive could hold, of families who cooked in shared kitchens, of artists who painted murals on domes while children danced, of smiths who sang lullabies into molten beskar. It tells you that Sundari, for all its flaws, was never just a seat of power. It was a dream written in steel and song. And then, slowly, the light shifts not in brightness, but in feeling, as if the city is remembering itself with you. You see visions rise from the floor like smoke. A young girl weaving red cloth in a marketplace. A guard setting down his weapon to help a merchant lift her stall. a teacher writing Mandoa across a wall as students laugh softly behind him. None of these figures are famous, none etched into holocrons or legends, and yet they are the true builders of Sindari. Their lives were the mortar between the stones, their hopes the breath in the city's lungs. You leave the dome and descend into the garden levels, where flora once bloomed beneath the city's artificial sun. Now vines creep up fractured walls, finding new homes in broken places. The greenery is unplanned, wild, thriving not because it was planted, but because it survived. You kneel beside a flower, pushing through a crack in the durocrete. Its petals are violet edges singed with soot, and still it opens toward the sky. You place your hand beside it, and in the stillness feel the lesson it offers. Beauty does not come after destruction. It comes from within it. Further on, you discover a corridor, half buried in rubble, once leading to a hall of debate where policy was shaped and reshaped until it collapsed under its own weight. You crawl through the gap, brush aside stone, and step into a room filled with fractured desks and scorched datapads. But carved into one remaining wall, you find something untouched, a child's drawing, crude lines, a sun with too many rays, a figure with a jetpack, and beside it, a dome hole, perfect, smiling. Beneath it, the words, "This is meant." You do not know who drew it. You only know they believed. Outside, as the morning light gathers, the survivors return, not many, but steady. They walk the streets barefoot, heads unbowed. One woman drags a broken bench from the rubble and sets it upright. A boy climbs a tower's skeleton to hang a piece of cloth dyed with the colors of his vanished clan. A pair of warriors exchange nods and begin clearing debris, not as laborers, but as keepers of something sacred. No orders are given, no flags are raised, yet unity breathes in every quiet movement. Not the unity of law, but of lived sorrow, of shared silence. Among them, you do not lead, you do not speak, you simply work. You lift stone, you carry fragments. You listen when elders point out where gardens once bloomed, where ceremonies were held, where their children first donned their helms. Every corner they show you carries a pulse, and you understand now that Sindari was never truly destroyed. It was simply waiting for hands willing to remember it without remaking it. At dusk, you sit alone on a ledge above the city. Below, lanterns flicker, some shaped like stars, others like mythosaur skulls, some just jars with glowing insects inside. None match, none need to. The light they cast is not coordinated, collective, and as you watch it shimmer across the broken stone, you feel the crown forming again, not in iron, not in ceremony, but in the way that people look at each other now, as if they are beginning to believe again, as if the silence they shared has become the foundation of something far stronger than walls. You close your eyes, and in the stillness, you hear the city breathe, not loudly, not proudly, but deeply, like lungs filling with air after a long sleep. You place your hand on the stone beside you, and for a moment it feels warm, not from the sun, from memory, from presence. This is what the Empire could never understand, what Deathwatch never realized, what even the Duchess could not fully grasp. That Mandalore cannot be ruled, it cannot be tamed. It can only be remembered by those who are willing to carry its silence without needing to crown it. And as the stars rise, you rise with them. You leave Sundari behind, but not empty. You carry its breath, its weight, its waiting, and far from its ruins, wherever you walk next. The city walks with you, not as a ghost, but as a beginning. You descend now through orbits, hush, toward the fractured moon of Concordia, where shadows move not with menace, but with memory. The surface is jagged, ancient, silvered by time, and marked by the scars of old conflict. Craters ripple like forgotten wounds across its face and below. Its surface buried deep in its bones, sequels of war still sleep. You step lightly, though your weight is not enough to wake them. Not yet. The silence here is different. Not the silence of peace, nor even of death. This is the silence of waiting, the kind that lives between breath and blade. And you know, before your boots touch ground, that somewhere beneath you, the Darksaber is still singing, not in sound, but in pulse. It was here that betrayal took its deepest root, not in the heart of Mandalore, but in its reflection, this moon, always watching, always harboring what the capital could not admit. The foundries once hidden within these hills belched fire under the guise of mining, but they forged more than ore, they forged divisions. They birthed secret armies beneath a sky that never saw daybreak. You feel their ghosts now as you step through the remnants of an outpost long abandoned. Rusted Beskar fragments line the floor, some shaped into jagged armor, others twisted from detonations. No one recorded, and in the dust you find boot prints preserved in ash. They do not walk away. They stop suddenly, as if the wearers were taken mid-step. The Darksaber's story cannot be told without this place, without the ones who claimed it, not out of heritage, but of hunger. Here, Maul's shadow fell longest. It was not here he first took the blade, but it was here he proved it could be used not to unite, but to fracture. You see it now as you walk, deeper visions flickering like static in the corridor walls. A horned figure wielding black fire, warriors kneeling, others dying. The weight of legacy bent to the will of an outsider. The Darksaber did not protest. It sang because it does not judge the hand that holds it. It only mirrors the heart. And in Maul, it found a heart broken enough to wield it without trembling. You reach the great hall where the last loyalists of death watch once gathered. There, creeds twisted into something sharper than purpose. The banners remain faded, torn, stitched with symbols of authority, long abandoned. One wall bears the imprint of a throne, scorched into the metal by fusion burns, and above it, etched in fire, the words, "Only the blade decides." But the blade does not decide. You know that now. It responds. It reflects. It amplifies what already lives inside its wielder. You move past the hall into the tunnels where the last defense was mounted. The smell of plasma lingers still, old and bitter. Along the walls, names are carved not by victors, but by those who died believing they were saving Mandalore by tearing it apart. Vok, Shan, Era, Kale. You do not know their faces, but you feel their choice. To kneel before a false king, to follow a crown forged in rage, not out of cowardice, but desperation. They believed Mandalore needed control, even if that control came from a blade held by hands soaked in alien blood, and somewhere, beneath the deepest vault, sealed behind layers of crumpled metal and ancestral fury, you find it, the cradle of the Darksaber, a chamber of obsidian, untouched. By light, save for a single shaft slicing through the ceiling. In its center, an altar, and upon it, not the blade, but the memory of it. A hollow hilt, a shadow etched into stone. You kneel before it and close your eyes, and in that instant, you hear the song. It is not loud, it is not beautiful, it is old. It sings of Tari Vizsla, the first to forge light into shadow, a Mandalorian Jedi torn between two creeds, who carved his place into legend, not with loyalty, but with longing. The blade he crafted was not meant for dominance. It was meant for dialogue, a bridge, but it became a weapon because those who followed him forgot the conversation. They remembered only the flame. The song shifts. It sings of battles where the blade passed from hand to hand, not through succession, but through blood. Of rulers who claimed its power, but could not bear its burden. Of warriors who tried to hide it, who tried to destroy it, who tried to lock it away, thinking that if the Darksaber vanished, the weight of Mandalorian identity might grow lighter. But it never did, because the Darksaber is not a weapon, it is a question, and every time it is drawn, it asks, what does it mean to lead? You rise slowly, your hands empty, but your heart is heavy. The ghosts of Concordia press against your back, watching, not judging, waiting. The Darksaber is not here. It has moved on, but its song remains, embedded in the walls, in the dust, in the breaths of those who still walk this moon, and wonder if legacy can be inherited without becoming corrupted. You step back into the open air, and the stars above shimmer with old knowing. The dome of Concordia curves quietly around you. It is not dead, it is not healed, but it remembers. And somewhere far from here, you know, the blade sings, still waiting, not for strength, but for clarity. And when it is held again, the ghosts will listen. You move across the surface of Concordia now as one who no longer seeks the Darksaber, but the silence it left behind. The moon is quieter in this hour, as if exhausted from holding too many stories. You walk across old bridges that once connected foundries to strongholds, their supports crumbling, their paths faded into gravel and wind. Beneath your feet, the metal hums faintly, remembering the weight of armored boots and the pulse of Sybil. War. The Darksaber is gone from this place, but its song, low, mournful, and unfinished, lingers in every stone. It is not calling for a hand to wield it. It is calling for a soul to understand it. You descend into the lower caverns, following old vents once used to smuggle messages, weapons, and children through the war-choked underbelly of the moon. Here, beneath the crust, stories gather in dust and whispered light. You reach a hidden chamber, carved not by machines, but by the slow labor of exiles. The walls are lined with old helmets, each bearing a single scratch across the brow, a symbol of shame, or perhaps remembrance. No names, no sigils, just silence. These are the helms of those who served leaders they later renounced. Warriors who chose to walk away from power rather than become its blade. And in the center of the room stands a sculpture, tall and elegant, formed of broken Beskar blades. It twists upward like a flame paused mid-dance, a small inscription etched into the floor beneath it. Power held too tightly becomes ruin. You kneel beside it and place your palm on the stone. There is no warmth, yet your breath catches as if a truth has just passed through you. The Darksaber was never meant to be held forever. It was meant to pass, to test, to warn. You leave the chamber and continue into the deeper vaults, where the moon's gravity bends oddly, where time seems thicker and memory folds in on itself. You arrive at the remnants of a library, not one of books, but of recorded battles. Holograms flicker in alcoves, looping endless footage of duels. You see warriors clash again and again, their movements elegant, brutal, desperate. The Darksaber dances between them like a ghost longing to belong. One warrior shouts before he falls, "I carry more than Steli carries story." His voice echoes as his image fades, and you realize that every bearer of the blade believed, even in their last breath, that they were right. But belief is not truth. You study the footage, some of it staged, some real. You begin to see a pattern not of victory, but of loss. The longer one holds the Darksaber, the more it takes. Their posture changes, their tone hardens, their allies fade. Isolation follows, then betrayal, then downfall. The blade is not cursed, it is honest. It exposes what lies beneath the armor. It does not corrupt, it reveals. You rise and follow an emergency stairwell leading back to the surface. Along the way, messages are scratched into the walls. Some are final words, others fragments of doctrine. One reads, "Strength untempered by wisdom breeds ruin." Another, "To lead with the blade is to forget the voice." These words are not warnings, they are memories. You emerge into a shallow basin surrounded by stone pillars, and there, to your surprise, stands a small group, warriors in weathered armor. They are not gathered for battle, they are here to listen. An elder speaks in a voice worn but clear. She recounts the tale of the Darksaber, as her clan remembers it not as a weapon, but as a mirror. She speaks of Tari Vizsla, not as a conqueror, but as a question unanswerable. Around her, the others remain still. No interruptions, no chants, just breath, just presence. They invite you to join them not with words, but with space. You sit beside a younger warrior, his armor patched and scraped, his helm resting in his lap. He nods to you and whispers, "Do you believe in it?" You do not answer, not because you doubt, but because belief is not enough. Not here, not anymore. Later, you walk with the elder through a grove of crystal-like trees growing from the mineral veins of the moon. Their branches glimmer in the starlight. She tells you the grove grew after the wars ended, fed by soil mixed with ash. And time, even the worst fire, leaves behind something that blooms, she says. You touch one of the branches. It hums faintly, like the Darksaber's old song, but gentler, less demanding. Perhaps this is the ansel growth that does not require war. Power that roots, not sears. Before you leave, the elder gives you a shard of obsidian shaped like a fang. Not from the saber, she says, but from the stone it was first laid upon. We keep pieces, not to worship, but to remind. You place the shard in your pouch, feeling its cool weight settle near your ribs. It does not burn. Its .60 ascend. The final ridge, Concordia, spreads behind you, moonlit, worn, patient. It has watched Mandalore rise and fall 1,000 times. It has seen the Darksaber sing in triumph and cry in ruin. It has hidden leaders and traitors alike, and still it waits, not for a blade, but for someone who remembers what it means to carry a story without trying to own it. At the ridge's edge, you stop and look back once more. The moon does not speak, but its silence is fuller now, more knowing. You nod once, and in that gesture, a vow unspoken. The Darksaber is not yours to wield, but its song is yours to echo. And somewhere beyond, in the folds of starlight, the ghosts of Concordia listen in peace. You return once more to the edge of the basin, where the moon's wind moves gently through the fractured teeth of the old battlements, and you sit with your thoughts wrapped around the shape of a blade that is no longer in your hand. The Darksaber has become less of a weapon now, and more of a shadow that walks beside you, a reminder not of what was taken, but of what was revealed. Concordia lies behind you like a closed book, its pages still warm, its words lingering even after the cover falls shut. The stories are not done, but they no longer demand to be spoken. They have passed into you, and you carry them now down the slope. You find a child kneeling beside a cracked visor, half buried in sand. She lifts it with both hands, cradling it, not with fear, but with curiosity. "Is this from the war?" she asks, and her voice is too soft to belong to the past. You kneel beside her, brushing the dust away from the faceplate, seeing not your reflection, but her question. You do not answer directly. You simply say, "It remembers." She nods as if that is enough, and places the visor atop a stone like an offering. You rise again and walk toward the last known sanctuary of the Moonwatchers, a group who refused to choose sides in the conflicts, who believed the Darksaber was never meant to stay in one hand, that the blade's purpose was not to lead, but to wander. They lived in the cliff caves that now sing with wind, and as you enter, you see their traces, rings of smooth stone where they once sat in circles, story carvers etched into walls, sigils drawn not with war paint, but with melted moon ore. In one chamber, you find a single phrase carved across the wall in looping Mandoa. "The saber has no master. It listens and it leaves." You sit there a long time, letting those words find space inside your chest. You begin to see the Darksaber as less of an object and more of a question passed between generations, test posed in silence, awaiting not victory, but truth. You think of all those who sought to wield it, some out of hunger, some out of hope, others out of desperation. Few understood its burden. Fewer still survived its answer. And yet it continues, not because it chooses rulers, but because it reveals the weight of wanting to be one. In the final chamber, behind a curtain of cascading mineral threads, you discover a room lit by natural blue light filtering through cracks in the stone. Here, there is no altar, no throne, only a table set with 7 pieces of empty armor, each shaped slightly differently, each bearing no name. The Moonwatchers left them not as relics, but as offerings to the unknown Mandalorians of tomorrow. They believed that leadership, if it were ever to return, should not come from blood or battle, but from silence. That the one who would next carry the Darksaber should first learn to carry nothing. You sit among the armor and close your eyes. And in the quiet that follows, you hear it again, not the blade's hum, not the clash of old duels, but breath, your own measured, present, alive. The blade does not sing this time, it listens, and in your stillness, it hears. Outside, the stars stretch their long fingers across the night, and the ghostlight of Mandalore gleams faintly on the horizon, a memory pulsing beneath cloud and ruin. You make your way to the topmost ridge of Concordia, where the view swallows you whole. There, the stars above, the planet below. and the moon beneath your feet create a triangle of legacy. You kneel not to pray, not to grieve, but to remember. Without needing to speak, you let the weight of every story settle in your spine. The burden is heavy, but not unbearable, because now you know it is not yours alone. It never was. Every hand that held the darksaber carried a piece of the truth. Some tried to turn it into law. Some tried to hide it. Others tried to destroy it. But none of them ever made it quiet. It always returned, seeking not to be wielded, but to be understood. And maybe now, at last, it is. You rise as dawn begins, to break on Mandalore's ruined horizon, casting thin light across Concordia's scarred face. You do not look back at the caves, nor the halls, nor the battles you did not fight. You look forward toward the space where a new question will rise, a question not shaped by the blade, but by the silence that follows it. You begin walking. Your path is unmarked. Your hands are empty, but your heart is full. And somewhere, far from moonlight and shadow, the darksaber sleeps again, not because it is forgotten, but because it has been heard. You descend now into the oldest shadows of the outer rim, drawn toward a moon that once shimmered beside Mandalore like a silent twin, now broken, its halves drifting apart like estranged siblings. This is not Concordia. This is Javer, Maril, the moon they do not speak of in archives or chants. The moon whose surface cracked not from war, but from betrayal, too deep to bear its own weight. You land at the edge of the Great Divide, where the ground gives way into a canyon so vast it seems to pull the sky inward. This is where it happened. This is where everything ended, for those who gave everything, believing they were defending the last true breath of Mandalorian honor. You walk along the rim, each step tracing the old path of warriors who were never meant to be remembered. They were the Shield clan's descendants of the wandering protectors, who refused to kneel before false banners, who swore loyalty not to a ruler but to the people. They did not seek power. They swore to stand between others and the fire. For centuries they remained neutral in civil wars, bound to a vow older than any throne, to protect the innocent, even if it meant defying the powerful. And it was here, on Javer Maril, that their story was extinguished. The sky above is fractured now, the stars distorted by the gravitational wound left behind when the moon tore. It wasn't a natural disaster. You feel it in your bones. This was done not by one strike, but by many political, ideological, generational. The cracks in the moon reflect the cracks in the creed. You find a memorial stone near the edge, unmarked by words but carved with shallow rings, one for each fallen family. The rings spiral inward until they vanish into a single point. You touch it and feel warmth beneath the stone. Someone still tends to it. Someone still remembers. You descend into the rift itself, walking the skeletal stairs carved into the canyon walls. Each step is worn smooth from the passage of boots that never returned. Wind howls through the gap, low and constant, like the voice of the dead trying to speak without language. At the base, you find the remnants of a settlement buried under glassed sand and scorched rock. This was once a refuge, a temple, a forge, whatever it needed to be. Now it is a grave, but it does not mourn. It waits. Among the ruins, you find the circle of Asha ring of blackened armor, arranged in a perfect spiral. Each suit hollow, each visor turned inward. This was the final stand of the Shield clans, made not against an enemy, but against their own. A high warlord from Mandalore, fearing their growing influence and refusal to align, declared them enemies of the Creed. The Darksaber did not judge the act. It was not present. Only warships arrived. No parley, no warning, only fire. And yet the warriors of the Shield clans did not flee. They stood in a ring around their elders and children, defending not with wrath, but with resolve. They knew they would fall, but they believed that honor was not survival, it was the manner of one's end. You kneel at the center of the ring, where the last of them is said to have stood with arms spread, inviting death not in defiance, but in dignity. The ground is darker here. The ash does not drift. It clings. You do not speak. The silence does not ask you to. You explore the catacombs beneath the settlement next, where survivors once fled before the final bombardment. Inside, time has held its breath. Crates of supplies, notes etched in walls, prayers whispered into soil. You find a small library, one room, round, with shelves carved into stone, filled with scrolls made from laminated cloth. On them, the names of the children who were taken in by the clans, foundlings from dozens of worlds, each name followed by a line, made Mandalorian not by blood, but by choice. You read those names slowly. You read them all. Outside, night returns. Javer Muriel's fractured halves cast overlapping shadows that dance across the ruins like cloaks moving without bodies. You climb back to the surface, standing again at the edge of the divide, and feel the moon's pull. The pieces do not drift aimlessly. They remain in orbit, locked in slow grief, as if even in death the moon refuses to be forgotten. And beside you now stands an old warrior. You hadn't seen him arrive. His armor is mismatched, his cape torn, but his presence is steady. He does not greet you. He only gestures toward the canyon. We fell, he says, but not before teaching them what standing looked like. Then he hands you a shard of burnt Beskar, warped and sharp, and says, "This is what's left when pride is louder than purpose. Carry it or leave it." You take it. He nods. Into the divide, then turn away, not to forget, but to carry forward, because those who fell here did not fall in vain. They stood for something that still waits to be named. And though the moon split in two, their vow did not. You return to Javer Muriel with the shard still pressed against your ribs, its weight unchanging despite the distance you've traveled. There is no path this time, only instinct. The moon's fractured halves drift further, apart now, but the wound between them no longer bleeds. Instead, it listens. You descend into the eastern half, the lesser-known fragment, where sunlight breaks along jagged edges and illuminates plains once cultivated by those who did not wear helmets, but tended to the armor of others. The keepers, the cooks, the smiths, the teachers, those who lived so the warriors could fight, and when the warriors fell, kept living so their memory would not. Among the broken valleys, you find terraced steps carved by hand into the black stone, leading to the remnants of the Hall of Roots. It is buried now beneath dust and time, but as you clear the entrance, the walls greet you with warmth, not of fire, but of presence. The hall was never meant to be sacred, yet you feel reverence. In every corner, its ceiling was painted once, not with stars, but with faces, not portraits of glory, but visages marked with age, with kindness, with imperfection, the faces of those who kept Mandalore grounded while others soared. You see, a mother in a simple shawl, a grandfather with a scorched pauldron resting on his lap, a teacher holding the hand of a foundling. None are named, all are remembered. At the center of the hall lies the hearthstone, a black monolith encircled by seating cut from surrounding rock. Every gathering began here, every farewell ended here. Around its base are etchings in the old tongue verses sung in the dark after the final bombardment, when food was scarce and the sky no longer wept rain, only ash. You sit among them and begin to understand. The Shield clans did not die only in battle. They faded in memory, erased by those who feared what they represented, a Mandalore not ruled by the sword, but shaped by community. Further beneath, you discover the Lattice Forge sanctuary, where apprentices once tempered not only Beskar, but their hearts. Here, rituals took place not for warriors, but for those preparing to live alongside them. A smith's vow was not only to craft with precision, but to listen before striking. The forge fires here were dimmer, cooler, built to preserve history more than to burn it. You run your fingers along the walls, feel grooves where hands once guided new generations through the sacred act of shaping armor, not for domination, but for defense. One panel shows a child hammering beside an elder, their arms moving in rhythm. Beneath it, a single line: "The armor remembers when we cannot." You realize this place was never meant to survive war. It was meant to outlast it, and it has. Outside, the wind begins to rise. You climb to the highest ridge of the eastern fragment, where a lone obelisk juts against the reddened sky. It is cracked, leaning, nearly broken, but it stands. Around it, stone benches remain, facing outward, the city, not toward the battlefield, but toward the void between the moon's two halves, the space where something sacred was torn. You sit and feel the ache of Itha, space between ideals, between memory and myth, between bloodline and belonging. This is what they died trying to hold together. Not a nation, not a planet, but the bridge between what Mandalore was and what it could be. You reach into your pouch and take out the shard. It glints dully in the light, no longer sharp, worn smooth by your journey. You place it on the bench beside you, and it hums faintly against the stone. Below, you hear voices young, ones echoing through the canyons, children playing, a woman calling them back inside. They live here now, in the ruins, in the memory. They do not carry the weight of history, not yet, but they breathe in its dust, walk through its bones, and grow strong within its silence. One boy appears at the edge of the ridge, barefoot. He eyes the shard. Then you nod, and he steps forward to sit beside it, not to claim, but to understand. Is it true, he asks, that the ones who died here didn't fight back? You consider his question, then say they didn't need to. They already knew who they were. He does not speak again. He simply places his hand over the shard and closes his eyes. When you leave, you do not take it with you. You descend again, crossing the last great ravine between the two halves of Javar. As you walk, you find a trail, subtle, worn into the rock by generations of quiet feet. The path winds toward the old landing sites, where vessels now lie as rusted skeletons. There, you find one still intact, its hull bearing the faded sigil. Of the original shield clans a pair of open hands, palms skyward, with a circle suspended above. It is not a symbol of submission. It is a symbol of offering. Inside the vessel, you find a room untouched, bunk beds with etched initials, meals half prepared in stasis, journals left open. The last entry reads, "If we are to fall, let us fall, like stars quiet, burning, seen." You close the journal and return it to its place. You leave nothing disturbed, nothing claimed. When you exit the vessel, the sky has shifted. The twin halves of the moon glow softly, mirroring one another across the chasm. For the first time, the divide seems less like a wound and more like a memory, painful, incomplete, but true. You pause before your ship and look back. The ruins do not beg you to stay. The wind carries no farewell, yet something roots inside you, a vow not shouted, not sworn, just breathed. Quiet as the shield once raised around the innocent, quiet as the moon before it broke. You speak no oath, but you carry it anyway. You rise before the stars begin to dim. And as the light creeps gently across the horizon of Javer Muriel's broken face, you take your final walk through the hush of its divided bones. There is no fanfare, no procession, only dust trailing softly behind your boots and the quiet rhythm of your breath, steady as any vow. The ground does not shake, the air does not sing, but something beneath it all listens a slow, patient witness to every step taken by those who once stood not to rule, but to shield. The moon does not grieve anymore. It remembers, and so do you. You descend into the hollow spine of a collapsed bridge that once connected the twin settlements of the Shield clans. Stones crack gently beneath your tread, and between the gaps you glimpse the abyss that split them widened over. Time by tremors, and time and the weight of unspoken sorrow. On the far end, remnants of an ancient gathering space cling to the cliff's edge, half fallen, half standing. You step beneath its arch, where sunlight threads through shattered slats and paints the floor in golden ribbons. Here, history breathes, not in speeches, but in silence. You find no altar, no pedestal, only a circle of seats facing inward. If even in collapse, the people who gathered here needed to see one another clearly. In the center lies a cloak, preserved by mineral deposits and time. It is not decorated, it is not folded. It simply rests fabric, heavy with soot, frayed. At the hem, you kneel before it, and though it does not move, it speaks. You hear no words, but you feel what it held. A leader who gave no orders, a mother who led with silence, a warrior who bore no blade, only the burden of guiding others toward gentleness in a time of fire. You do not lift the cloak, you place your hand beside it and bow your head. For some things are not meant to be carried, only honored. Above you, a wind begins to move, slow and steady. It whistles through the fractured archway and brushes against the back of your neck like a breath exhaled after centuries held too long. You rise, not to leave, but to continue. There are no ends here, only turns. You walk now to the outer edges, where children have begun to stack stones, not as walls, but as offerings. You add one of your own, without ceremony, without needing to tell them why. They do not ask, they only nod and return to their work, their small hands, careful, precise. You watch them for a while, realizing that this is what survival looks like, not rebuilding what was, but building what must be later. You cross to the western fragment, to the place where the final transmission was sent. In the ruins of a simple communications tower, you find a terminal powered by solar cells and willpower. The last message was brief, but whole. It reads, "We stood where others would not. We fell so others could remain standing. If you find this, do not seek vengeance, seek understanding." You let the message loop 3 times before deactivating it. Before you go, you return once more to the divide, the great scar between the moon's halves, now shrouded in a gentle mist. You walk to its edge, where the wind moves upward, lifting the dust into slow spirals. You remove your gloves and reach into your pouch, retrieving the shard you were given long ago. It is smoother now, its edges dulled, its surface darkened with oils from your hands. You lift it into the wind and release it. It does not fall, it floats, carried by the breath of 1,000 unspoken names. You do not watch it vanish, you turn away. You begin your walk back through the valley, through the settlements, through the fields now sprouting green between the cracks. Life returns slowly, stubbornly, not because it forgets, but because it remembers differently, with roots instead of armor at your ship. You pause once more to look at the moons as they drift further apart, and yet, even from a distance, they mirror one another. Their wounds align, their ridges echo. Though cleaved, they still orbit the same sun, still tethered by the gravity of memory. You realize then that the Shield clans were not destroyed. They were scattered, like seeds, and seeds do not mourn when buried. They wait, they root, they rise. You leave Javer Mariel, not as a witness, nor as a chronicler. You leave as one who has inherited something without a name, a burden that does not crush, a silence that does not ache, a vow that cannot be spoken but lives beneath your tongue, shaping your every step forward. No helmet marks you, no banner claims you, no blade anoints you, but when the stars whisper of Mandalore's soul, they will speak of you, because those who fell for honor did not fall alone, and through you they rise again. You awaken to the sound of metal, scraping metal, not in chaos, not in battle, but in ritual. Somewhere beyond the haze of sleep, a forge breathes, and with every strike of hammer upon Beskar, you remember, this is not a memory you lived, yet it lives inside you like a story passed through blood. You open your eyes to find yourself beneath the vaulted ceiling of an ancient hall, its arches scorched, its banners faded into shadow. The helm rests in the center, atop a pedestal of stone worn smooth by centuries of silent reverence. It is not decorated, it is not grand, it is simple, a T-shaped visor, a dome of silence. The same helm worn by 1,000 generations, unchanged and unchallenged, and yet everything in this room was shaped by it. You approach slowly, each step echoing like a question across the stone. Around you murals stretch across the walls, scenes of war and peace, of children offered to fire, of clans dividing, reuniting, then dividing again. The helm is present in every image, not as symbol, as sentence, as law. For the creed did not begin with blood, it began with silence. A silence wrapped in metal, a vow sealed by anonymity. To remove the helm was to unravel the self. To break the creed was not just to betray the clan but to become nameless. You stand before it now, breathing its weight into your lungs. The helm, worn by the first, worn by the last, and in between, worn by countless who never questioned why. They did not ask whether the creed was born of wisdom or desperation. They accepted it as sky, as gravity, as breath. And yet, deep within you, a doubt stirs not of disrespect, but of grief. Because within every tradition is the shadow of its cost, and the creed, for all its unity, has buried many truths in the silence it demands. You step back and walk the perimeter of the hall. Here you see the old text etched into stone, not to be read, but to be endured. The creed is not long, it is not poetic, it is carved with the precision of law, not the grace of prayer. This is the way, it says, and every word that follows is armor. No removal, no attachment, no indulgence, no face, no questioning. Each line a lock, each phrase a hinge. But behind every lock is something trapped, and behind every hinge is something trying to open. You move now toward the adjacent chamber, where helms of the fallen are preserved, not for display, but for continuation. Rows of visors stare forward, in eternal vigil, each one once worn by someone who lived, breathed, fought, and died, never once revealing their face. You pause before one small, clearly worn by a youth, and feel the ache settle behind your sternum. They died Mandalorian, yes, but did they die known? You whisper their name, even if you don't know it, just to break the silence. You are led next into a room where old footage plays, flickering across curved walls. Warriors training, eating, praying, sleeping, always in armor, always masked. The creed created an unbroken lineage, a civilization of shadows. And yet, in the movement of one warrior's shoulders as they hold a child, you see it, the yearning to be seen. Even behind the visor, the need flickers like flame. The war that could not die began not with guns, but with oaths, with the refusal to remove the helm even in the face of extinction, with the insistence that to be seen was to be undone. The galaxy changed. The stars bent toward modernity, but the creed remained unyielding. Entire factions broke away, unable to bear the suffocation of faceless living, and yet others held tighter, believing the restrictions to be their salvation. They fought each other, not over land, not over throne, but over the very meaning of the way. You are taken now to the lower levels, where the last records of those wars are kept etched into walls with blades, as if only pain could preserve memory. You trace one line: to question is not heresy, to forget is, and another. I wore the helm for my clan, but my child never saw my eyes. These are not condemnations, they are confessions, left behind by those who followed the creed with all their soul, and yet wondered whether a tradition that demands invisibility can ever truly nourish identity. You pass a chamber where two helms rest side by side, one blackened by fire, the other pristine. Above them, no plaque, no explanation, only the outline of two hands, fingers barely touching. You do not need to know the story, you feel it. Two warriors, opposed or united, perhaps both. The creed kept them apart, or perhaps it brought them together. And in that ambiguity, the war continues, and yet you do not reject the way you understand it. It gave order to chaos. It gave purpose to generations. It gave the Mandalorians their shape. But you also see the war that cannot die lives not on battlefields, but in every breath held behind a visor, in every tear never wiped, in every child never kissed. The war is not fought with rifles. It is fought with silence. You return to the central hall where the helm still rests. It has not moved. It has not changed. And yet something in you has. You do not lift it. You do not wear it. You kneel before it, not to submit, but to honor the weight it carries and the burdens it has never spoken aloud. And then you rise, not to defy, not to abandon, but to remember that the way is not only walked with armor sometimes. It must be walked with eyes open. You walk now through a corridor where every stone has been touched by war, yet no weapon hangs on the walls. The path is narrow, cut deep into the bedrock beneath the Creed Hall, and it leads into the oldest sanctuary of the Wather Vault of Bound Faces. It is not marked on any map. No sign announces its entrance. And yet, it was here that the first voices whispered the tenets in darkness. Voices too afraid to name themselves, yet brave enough to believe that identity could be stronger in silence than in light. The air is thick, cool, still heavy with the weight of those who bent beneath the first helms and never lifted them again. You descend alone, not to find answers, but to witness the bones of a belief that refused to die even as its people fractured like moons torn from orbit in the heart of the vault. 7 statues rise, carved not with precision but with reverence, each one faceless, helmed, their poses caught mid-motion, one lifting a child, one reaching for a fallen comrade, one kneeling with a blaster lowered. Around them, the words spiral upward on the walls in old Mandoa. We are not our faces, we are our choices. The echo of that vow wraps around you like a cloak stitched from smoke and devotion. And yet, even here, a question pulses behind. Every curve of stone, how much can one give to a creed before they disappear within it?